And
oh, sorry.
Okay, so we're going to talk about Pio Pico. Pio Pico was the last governor of Alta California, which means the last governor of Mexican California. But we have to go back to 1876 and actually to start talking about California, though, because California was not established until 1876 when, well, actually, even, of course, it was here, and the natives were all living here independently of each other. They were all over the riverbed and all over the place, different tribes. Right here near where Pio Pico bought this property, it was actually part of the Tongva tribe. They actually still exist here in this area, and they are the Tongva tribe. They do not have any gambling casinos here. Some of the other larger tribes do have gambling casinos around the area, but not them. Okay, so Pio Pico was born Cinco de Mayo, which is May 5th, 1801 at the San Gabriel Mission. His parents actually came here with the Diaz expedition of 1876. Of 1776, I'm sorry. They came here with the Diaz expedition. They traveled here with their parents and settled here in Los Angeles. And Pio Pico was actually born at the San Gabriel Mission, Cinco de Mayo, 1801. When he was born here, he was actually born a Spaniard because this was part of Spain. Spain was colonizing California, and this was part of Spain. However, to add to Pio Pico's mystique, in 1822, the Mexicans came and claimed this territory, and by default, he became Mexican. So he was born a Spaniard in 1801 and then became a Mexican in 1822, just by living here. Then, more miraculously, in 1850, when the Americans came and conquered this area, he became American. So he was born a Spaniard, became a Mexican, and then became an American without ever moving from Southern California. He did move from the San Gabriel Mission. He moved to the Presidio in San Diego and actually grew up there from the age of 5 to the age of 19 when his father passed away. He was one of 10 children. He had seven sisters and 2 brothers. And they were very, very poor growing up. His father was a military man and was a guard at the San Gabriel Mission first, and then the Presidio later. So they did not have much money. At the age of 21, his father passed away, and him and his brothers proceeded to build a house for their family, a large adobe in San Diego for his sisters and his mother to live in. And him and his brothers opened up a little store in San Diego and then moved over to Los Angeles and had a store here also. So that's how he started making his money, was that way. But in 1822, the Mexicans came and claimed this territory, and Pio Pico became involved in politics at that point. He was actually a rebel. He was for the people more than not. So he tried to help the people of California. He tried to make sure they were all given their due by the people of Mexico. And so he became, actually in 1832, he was governor for 20 days when he overthrew another governor. But in 1846, he became governor officially. He was appointed governor. So he was governor for the 2 years from 1846 to 48 during the Mexican-American War. He wasn't really happy about that because he knew there was a lot of dissent. People didn't want to become American. They didn't know what they wanted. They wanted to stay Mexican, actually. But of course, the United States won the war and it became the United States eventually. So in 1849, approximately after the Mexican-American War, Pio Pico came and bought 9,000 acres here in Whittier, California. It was part of Whittier, part of Downey, part of Bellflower. It was a big 9,000 acres of land that he bought. It encompassed 1 mile from the San Gabriel River 1 mile east. So it was a lot of land he bought. And it's actually about 106, the size of that land is about 106 Disneylands, which is pretty amazing. Not the parking lot and everything, but Disneyland itself. But 106 Disneylands would fit in those 9,000 acres. And just for your knowledge, an acre is about as large as a football field. Currently, we're about 9 acres large. We're about 5 acres large, I'm sorry. And we are open from Thursday through Sunday, and would like you to come and visit us. We have picnic tables, and we have a lot of history to share with you. And let's go back to Pio Pico, though. Okay, so as I said, he was born a Spaniard, became a Mexican, then became an American, all without ever moving from Southern California. He, I'm sorry, I don't usually do this. It's really hard to do it with not knowing what I'm talking about here. Okay, so he made his money cattle ranching mainly. So during the gold rush, Pio Pico went up north to Sutter's Mill and took a whole herd of cattle with him, and he sold the meat, he sold the skin, he sold the fat, he sold everything, and he sold it to people trying to find the gold. So although he got rich during the gold rush, it wasn't because of the gold rush. It was due to the gold rush, but not because he found gold. He actually used his business sense to make money, and that's how he made his fortune pretty much. But so I want to tell you, in order to understand how much money he made, at one time he actually bet $25,000 on a one horse race. It was $25,000, and me and another interpreter here have figured out that $25,000 at that time is equal to about $1 million in today's market. So he made $1 million bet at that moment, and he lost, and he didn't care. That just shows how much money he had. So he did do that. He liked to gamble. He liked to bet. He liked to gamble, and he enjoyed life. He had parties at his adobe. His adobe was about a 21-room adobe originally. Unfortunately, in 1846, there was a big flood that washed away part of the adobe. And after that time, he actually renovated the house in 1880 approximately. He redid the house, and the house was much smaller. But people still came and stayed there, and he still had parties. And he enjoyed his life here. Unfortunately, in 1854, his wife did pass away. She passed away, and he was alone in the house. He did have, of course, a housekeeper who lived there, and he ended up with 4 children eventually. He had 2 boys and 2 girls, and the girls, I believe, lived there with him, but the boys were old. When he was 60 years old, he had the boys, so they were a lot later in life. Pio Pico grew up poor, became very, very rich. Unfortunately, he died poor, and part of the reason for that was because he never bothered to learn English. He didn't think he needed to. In the way we have been looking over everything we looked over, we believe that his brother Andres Pico was the brains behind him. Unfortunately, Andres Pico died in 1876, and that is when things pretty much went downhill for Pio Pico. That's when he started losing everything. In 1870, he did sell his San Fernando Valley property, which is about 116,000 acres of land. He sold that in order to build the Pico House in Olvera Street. The Pico House was a 3-story hotel that he had built in Olvera Street with indoor plumbing, which was crazy. Because remember, this was the wild, wild west. We were way behind the times. We didn't have indoor plumbing yet. He didn't anyway, here in his home. But back east, they already did. But he had indoor plumbing in that hotel. And actually, for a while there, the kings and queens came and stayed there. People of importance stayed there. Unfortunately, eventually, the city of Los Angeles brought the hotel down, and unfortunately, it became a flop house eventually. And he ended up losing that along with this property here, and that's how he became very, very poor. He went in for a loan on his property here at Pio Pico State Historic Park. He went for a loan, and when he went for the loan, he took an interpreter with him. Unfortunately, because he didn't know English, he trusted the interpreter, and he signed papers he should not have signed. He signed the deed of sale instead of loan papers. So he lost his property. It was swindled from him actually, but he lost his property. But worse than that, in 1876, his brother-in-law came to him and said, "Can I buy some of your San Diego property?" He said, "Of course." He owned about 146,000 acres of land there. And he told his brother-in-law, "Since you know English, please do the paperwork and I'll sign it." So when all was said and done, Pio Pico ended up signing over all of the San Diego property to his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law was Juan Forster. And if you go to San Diego, you might see Juan Forster's name on things back there now. But unfortunately, Pio Pico lost. That is when Pio Pico pretty much lost everything that he owned. So it's a sad story for him. He did, as I said, he was rich for quite some time, and he was happy when he was rich. But he ended up dying poor. And something that I forgot to mention to you, he did have an illness called acromegaly. Acromegaly is actually gigantism. And what it is he got the gigantism after puberty, so he did not get the height. He was only 5'7". And usually with that illness, you grow to be 7 feet tall. So he did not get the height, but also it did not affect his heart or his organs or anything. So he did not die at an early age, which usually happens with illness. He actually lived to the ripe old age of 93, and he died of old age, which is pretty amazing at that time, because during that time, people died in their 50s and 60s almost automatically. Like his wife was in her mid 40s when she passed away in 1854. So it's just kind of sad the things that happened to him. But he was people seemed to like him. And this house here, people would come past this house, and if they were here at night, you couldn't travel at night out on the desert in the land because it was dark. There was no lights, obviously no lamp posts. And so if he saw people out there, he would allow them to stay in his home. Since he had a large home, they could stay, and he'd cook for them and he'd feed them, and he'd let them stay and get their bearings. And the next day they would get up and leave and go wherever they were going. So, Margaret, do you have any questions for me?
Oh my gosh, I have so many questions.
Hey, let's try that, okay? Because it's hard to do this without a give and take a little bit.
Yeah, no, you're doing great. Okay, so you said he had gigantism, but he wasn't tall. How did they know he had that?
Well, they figured that out because in his I guess it was never totally they didn't do tests on him because gigantism wasn't known until the next century anyway, till 1900 more or less. So they didn't really, they couldn't really know for sure, and they didn't test him for it, but they just figured it out. Because if you look at pictures of him, you see large hands, and his facial features before the age of 50, his facial features were very prominent. You could see them. But the illness dissipated in his 50s. It disappeared, which is kind of weird. The pituitary gland went back into service and started working again. And that's when he started growing his his beard.
Is that a picture of him behind you?
That is him probably in his 60s or 70s. But I will show you another picture. I can show you this. I'll just do this. Okay. Right here is a picture of him up there with his wife. And that's one of his, in his 50s. He was in his 50s right there. Can you see it? I can't.
You got to angle a little bit down. Yep, right there. There we go.
Okay, that's him with his wife on his right, and his two nieces on either side of him, on either side of them. But see, notice his face, how weird it is. But look at his hands. I don't know if you can see them or not. But look at his hands, how large they are. And his lips and his face.
Interesting.
But what's interesting is after it went away, he started growing facial hair.
That's really interesting.
And we think that was part of what happened with it, was that he couldn't grow facial hair. So.
Do you mind talking a little bit more about what happened with the brother-in-law? So did the brother-in-law also swindle him?
The brother-in-law swindled him, exactly. He had him sign paperwork saying that he was giving him the paperwork. Giving him only so much property, but he signed over everything. But what I'm going to say right now is his brother-in-law I found out later, the family said that the brother-in-law did it because Pio Pico was losing everything. Unfortunately, that doesn't really work because he never gave him back any property or anything. So, so it's really sad. He took advantage of him, which was not a good thing.
So what happened to his children?
Well, his daughter lived in Los Angeles, and that's actually where he died. He moved to when he moved out of here in 1891. He was evicted from here in 1891, and he moved in with his daughter in Los Angeles. His son-in-law, his daughter's husband, was the branch manager for the property here, and so he had a special place for him. He felt really close to them, so that's why he moved in with them. He had another daughter, Griselda. I don't think she ever got married, though. I think she was pretty much single her whole life. And the two sons, one passed away at the age of 21 in a knife fight. So the other one lived a long life to the age of 65, I believe. So, but the There are a lot of Picos around, by the way. There are still a lot of Picos around.
That was going to be my next question, if he has any relatives that still survive.
Yeah, we actually had a wedding here about 6 years ago of one of Pico great grandson.
Oh my gosh.
And so we had Picos going out from everywhere. We had Picos all over the place for a while.
Oh, that's amazing.
We do
History is alive.
Yeah, we do have a foundation here that where there are great grandchildren that are still part of it. So
Oh wow, that's amazing.
they call it the grandfather's home. So I mean, just so you know,
Oh,
they find it a special place for them. But
yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Vic, do you have any questions?
Well, I'm still stuck on the acromegaly, which is a disease of the cartilage. That explains why the height wasn't there. But it's this poor guy. I mean, he lived a really long, miserable life. I mean, at first it wasn't, but I wonder, how much of it was, the kind of gambling instinct he had and taking a gamble on trusting people. That are just thoughts that were occurring to me while you were talking about him.
like I was telling you, I believe that his brother Andres Pico was the brains behind him.
Mm.
And when he passed away, that's when everything went downhill. It was like because Andres Pico was part of was part of the Mexican military, but then he was part of the American militia. Afterwards, when he became the United States, he was part of the American militia too.
It seems like a guardian to his brother-in-law, like a guardian. And so he was no longer safe when he didn't have that guardianship anymore.
Exactly. When he no longer had his big brother, it was just like,
yikes.
And at least that's how I see it. We try to figure things out because, of course, a lot of things are not written down, so we just kind of infer things and figure things out ourselves. So
the family that now exists, do they have anything inherited at all from the estate?
Unfortunately not, because everything was gone when he moved out of here. Everything was gone. We had a table, the dining room table was donated to us by a grandchild.
Oh.
And also we have the walking stick that he had was donated. And we have a few items that were donated by the family.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And you guys are aware of the Pico House, right? Have you been there before? Any of you?
Where is it located now?
The Pico House is right there in where Rivera Street is.
Yeah, I've been there.
Okay, so it is right at the corner of where it is, right where the fiesta part is, the little part with the where the music usually is. Right next to that is the big building. You'll see it there, and it says Pico House on it.
Yeah,
I'm sure I walked right past it last time I was there.
I'm sure you have, and they have renovated parts of it, and they were going to make office buildings inside the second floor. But I think the city, they put a stop to that. People don't want that. They want to put back to something more historical. I believe that's what's going on.
Oh, that's great. So how did the house become part of the state parks then?
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, so in 1907, the city of Whittier was going to knock down the property because it was like in disarray. It was just bad. So the city of Whittier was going to knock it down. Fortunately, Harriet Strong, who was a local businesswoman who was a friend of Pio Pico's, came and bought the property and started fixing it up. And so for about 7 or 8 years, she tried to fix it up and keep it going. She didn't think that someone as important as Pio Pico's, his home should be demolished. So she fixed it up. She was very rich and she was a businesswoman, and she was, she actually got an organization together, a women's group together to help fix it up. So she was fixing it up. And then unfortunately in 1917, she realized she couldn't do it anymore. It was just too expensive and too much work. And she deeded it over to the state of California, to the city of Whittier, I believe. And then the city of Whittier deeded it to the state of California. And by 1927, it was one of the first state historic parks in California.
That's amazing. I didn't know that.
And there are about 52 state historic parks, but there are about 280 state parks, California state parks.
Right.
280, but 52 state historic parks. But we're one of those, so we're special. We're really special.
Yeah, one of the first.
Yes.
That's amazing. So do you mind talking a little bit more about him making his money? Because you were saying he was one of the richest men in Alta California for a while.
Correct. Okay, so what he did was well, during the when he was governor or when he was in politics, he did get land grants at that time too. He got land grants from different governors and stuff. And so his family, at one point, he had 532,000 acres of land. In 1855, he had 532,000 acres of land.
Wow. And that was all ranches?
They were all ranches. There were 5 different ranches. He had one in the San Fernando Valley, which is the one he sold to build the Pico House.
Uh-huh.
And then he had the San Diego one, which is this largest. And that was the one that was the one where his brother-in-law stole from him. He had one in Anaheim that I don't have any stories on, so I don't know what happened to it.
Mm.
And then he had this one, which he lost with the loan, the loan being swindled.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, he thought he should, that learning English wasn't important to him because he was so important. But unfortunately, that's not the way it works.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he made his money though with cattle ranching mainly when he went when he went up north and Sutter's Mill and sold the meat. He sold the skin, he sold the fat, he sold everything and made a lot of money.
Mm.
He was smart enough to use the gold rush in a different way, not just to find gold, because he couldn't. That wasn't the way to do it, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And then, can I ask you another question about him being governor?
Yes.
So what was politics like back then? Like, what would it have been like to become governor? Would you have run in an election or be nominated?
That's a great question. Okay, actually, the Mexican governors like that were appointed. And I kind of skimmed over, but in 1832, Pio Pico overthrew a standing governor here in Alta California. He overthrew him, and for 20 days, he was acting governor. But in 1846, he actually appointed governor, so that was his job at that point. He was actually appointed. Yeah, they appointed. They didn't vote for people.
And when he overthrew the other governor, that was with like a militia or something?
That's definitely, yeah. He was a rebel. He definitely was a rebel. He didn't like the way he was treating. I think it was Michelenda or something. I can't even say the name of the guy the governor that was, but I think he wasn't treating the people well. People didn't think so anyway. Didn't feel he was.
Wow.
That was important to Pio Pico. The people were important to him. And something I forgot to tell you was Pio Pico was Italian, African, Spanish, and Native. Those were his ethnicities. And it's partially why his look is so a little different, because he has so many ethnicities in him.
He had an interesting history.
Yes, he did. Like I said, he was a fascinating person, and I didn't learn about him until I started working here, which is pretty sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't learn that much about him either. It's really interesting.
Yeah, my mom, who grew up in downtown Los Angeles, she was born in 1933, so she lived history somewhat,
Mm-hmm.
She remembers seeing the Pico House when it was kind of still being in use and stuff. So it's just kind of amazing to think. And she talked about it with us, when I was younger, little. I'm old now.
Oh, come on, girl. You're not old.
I didn't listen that well, I guess, because I didn't remember what she said, but I wish I had, because it is interesting.
So your mom and you both grew up in Los Angeles?
I've been in Los Angeles all my life, yes, but she grew up in downtown.
Okay.
More to the east, I guess, southeast side of town, I guess.
So how did you decide to become an interpreter at the Pio Pico House?
Actually, I had just left my job of accounting job that I was doing, and I needed something. And I didn't want a full-time thing. I just wanted something, and this is a part-time job only. It's only 4 days a week. So, but I mean, it's really interesting, and it's just something that I needed something new to do, and maybe open me up to more things like doing this. I would never think of myself doing this, things like that. But so I just applied, and I got the job. Thank goodness.
So what did you think was the most surprising thing? Because you said you didn't learn about him growing up. So what was the most surprising thing that you learned after you started working there?
Well, I do feel that his the way he approached he tried to assimilate to whatever came his way. He just assimilated to it and didn't try to buck the system. He tried to work with the system. And I think that was that just made me realize that, and he accepted anybody. And I think that's partly why California is such a melting pot, partly because of him, I think. Because he was here, he let that's what he embraced when he was here. I think that's really important to know that he is.
Yeah, interesting. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has just been awesome. I really appreciate how you've kind of adapted as we've gone along.
I'm so sorry, but I'm really
it was just a really great presentation. Thank you so much. Vic, did you have any more questions?
Well, I do have a comment, Kathy. I respect what you're doing there. I was born in Pomona and grew up in Southern California with 3 siblings. My folks lived in LA and were there in the 30s, 40s, and on, and both died there. But this was not a name during my education. I got at least 10 years on you that ever came up. It wasn't in textbooks. It wasn't the mission.
I thought it was crazy. That's what I was thinking. I mean, he's important to the history of California because was a base for California. It was him. And it's just crazy that he's not anywhere. You're right. I didn't learn, like I said, I didn't learn anything about him till I was here.
Well, you're spreading the news.
I'm enjoying it too. I really am. These Zoom tours are great. We're getting out to more people than previous too.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I appreciate you letting us. I'm going to go ahead and hit the stop record.